$100 million in 1 year. You must have thought you were the SHIT. Like, are you like actively trying to be humble? Yeah, come on, Isabelle. How did you keep your feet on the ground? And what was that process like?
I will explain, but I actually don't feel like I got arrogant at that point at all. I feel like I got almost like desperate. When you put that much pressure on something that's so young and immature, it's like a total pressure cooker. In a lot of ways, I felt awful every day. Like I felt like I was having a fire hose sprayed in my face every morning. I felt like I wasn't the right person. Like I felt like I had no idea what I was doing. And I'm not a person who like had regularly experienced imposter syndrome in her career before. I kind of always thought like I deserved more responsibility and I was doing a good job. And like it was a real turning point in terms of my self-awareness. And that kind of growth is hard and like feels awful. Like it's really painful.
My 3 favorite ladies, well, that includes myself in this trio. So I should probably say my 2 favorite ladies, Alex and Isabelle, 2 of the smartest women I know. Isabelle, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, when you said yes, I was like, oh my goodness, Alex, this is going to be a lot of fun because you have a lot of lessons to teach. You've taught us a lot about what it means to be an entrepreneur, what it means to build, what it means to grow, what it means to fail, what it means to then grow bigger. And so thank you for taking the time to be with us here. And I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our audience. Share who you are, how you became the Isabelle that you are today. And yeah, and I think let's just start there and we'll go from there.
Oh, thank you. For what it's worth, I feel like I learned way more from you two than you ever learned from me. But there were definitely, I definitely have like early memories of swapping decks and chatting with you guys about every part of the experience. I'm Isabelle. I grew up in New Jersey. I spent the early part of my career in Hong Kong. I worked in investment banking. And then I moved to London to work at an e-commerce startup in like 2011. And I was there for a couple of years working in e-commerce in London and New York. And then I broke my back skiing. And it was, for me, like this total inflection point in both my career, but also my overall life. I didn't really recover well. And so it took about 10 months.
You broke your back. I mean, that's a huge thing. We hear about back problems. I mean, we all suffer from these chronic pains, but you actually broke your back. That's crazy.
Yeah, I had so little I had so little trauma and so little real health issues, so few health issues in my life until that point. And I really was just plunged like headfirst into this insanely vulnerable thing, which is like you can't move and you feel awful and everyone's telling you you should feel better and you should be healed faster and you just aren't. And you're like lost and frustrated and trying to navigate doctors. And I was like, I am one of the most connected people in New York City. I have access to the best healthcare on planet Earth, and I can't figure this out. And it ultimately ended up being that I broke not only my back, but also my sacrum, part of your pelvis. But it took like almost 3 months to learn that, which is insane. And it was just like 3 months of people being like, you should feel better. You should be fine. And me being like, I don't feel better.
Yeah.
And then ultimately it was this amazing healing process, which I think you and we've all talked about a lot, which is like this team of like Feldenkrais and Reiki and acupuncture and Pilates and yoga. And like, if I wasn't doing the whole care team, I felt terrible. And if I was keeping it all together, then I felt really good. And so for me, that was just this moment of like, I want to spend the rest of my career fixing healthcare. This is insane. Like life's short. Like you should spend time making an impact where you want to, where you can. And for me, it was like everything about this is a problem. Like the care I got living in New York City was incredible, but the delivery of that care was medieval. And for me, having worked in retail and e-commerce, I was naive enough to think this is just one big retail business that should be an e-commerce business. And I was also, I think I was 26, 27. And so I was also naive enough to be like, I'm really well equipped to fix this. Just like I wasn't. But I just jumped in and I started working in healthcare startups. I think it was 10 years ago now.
Wow, how amazing. I love the early days in your 20s when you think you can do anything and you think you're the most capable. And Lee and I often talk about this, how we were so clueless, but yet we were so fierce and fearless. We were just going after it. And now it's almost like we know too much. And sometimes it slows us down. Do you feel the same?
You can almost see it, but my front door has a sign on it that says fearless. And like, I still feel that way. Like, I still feel like
Love that.
to be an entrepreneur is to believe that you can do things that people haven't done before, and to like believe that things that other people like vehemently disagree with are true. And so you just have to be fearless. Like, you just have to be willing to take the jump. And I'm not always like that, but I'm often like that.
How do you become fearless, and how do you deal with the doubt that seeps in at night when you're laying in
What a
when you're replaying all the no's? How do you maintain that fearless energy?
To me, I think about this a lot, and especially in the context of like starting a family and values. And I think it's a mix of nature and nurture. Like, I think in some ways I was just born that way. Like, in some ways I just have like a risk tolerance that other people around me don't have. And in some ways my parents were so good at instilling that in us. And I think about both of my parents are entrepreneurs. My earliest memories are the phone. They were always, we had a car phone before anyone I knew had a car phone. They were always on the phone. They were always selling. They
Yeah.
were always talking to their clients. Like, my mom worked nights and weekends, like in a world where that wasn't like how people worked. And they were always working, and they just, they had like this insane hustle that reminds me a lot of you guys. And they just taught me that like I could do anything, and that it was just about hard work, right? If you don't give up, if you just persevere, you can do whatever you want. And I think they sent me to all girls school. Like, they were really focused on me believing that I could do whatever I wanted to do. From like a very early age, I wanted to be the president when I grew up. And they were like, great. Like, that's awesome.
Is that still in the works, Isabelle?
I'm still pretty into politics, but I think like they were really focused on saying like, okay, if that's your goal, what do you do between now and then? And then they're kind of hippies in their own right. And so they were like, we're never going to tell you what to do or how to get from point A to point B, but we will support you in that journey. And I think that like feeling like you have that unconditional support is what makes you fearless.
I love that. And walk us through a little bit when you had that moment, kind of this aha moment after you broke your back, and clearly you identified something that was broken, and you had no experience in healthcare. You were very young. And a lot of our audience are finding themselves in the exact same dilemma, right? They've either taken a career pause, either they've worked in an industry that they no longer like. How do you get used to a new industry? How did you go from not knowing nothing to basically conquering the world of healthcare?
Definitely haven't conquered the world of healthcare.
Well, you have. You have.
But I've definitely taken some big swings. But for me, it was visceral. It was like, I hate going to the pharmacy. Every time I go to the pharmacy, there's another excuse for why I can't get the thing that they texted me a bunch of gibberish to come pick up. And it was a different price, or it wasn't covered by my insurance, or it wasn't going to be covered by my insurance for another 72 hours, or it was out of stock, or it had been ready, but now it was unready and they needed to get it ready again. And I was like, this makes no sense. And I started telling everyone I knew, including you guys, that I wanted to buy a pharmacy and put lipstick on it. I was like, I'm just going to buy a pharmacy in Queens, and I'm going to build an app, and it's just going to get delivered to you, and you're not going to have any of this problem. And I think huge startup lesson number one, I told enough people that someone was like, there's a really good team of people working on that, and you should get involved. And I was like, great. I just want a seat on the rocket ship. It doesn't need to be my rocket ship. And I met this group of people who was a few months into working on rebuilding the pharmacy, and they were incredibly thoughtful about how they were doing it and how they were going to win. And I was like, this is a really good match for me. And I joined that team, and I was there for like 3.5 years. And I ended up building out the operations in the beginning, building out sales and marketing in the middle, like building out an outside sales team of pharma salespeople. I had Googled what is outside sales when my boss asked me to do that. And then I ended up building out strategic partnerships at the end, and just finding bosses and teams who believe in you, who will give you opportunities, and who really just like understand you and your blind spots, your weaknesses, your strengths, and then want to put you in roles that let you just kind of like unleash your potential was the luckiest thing that happened to me at that point in my career.
And I also think a really important takeaway from this for those thinking about going off and taking that leap in a direction that might be more fulfilling is that you were sharing this idea. You weren't holding it close to your chest. So many times I meet people and they're like, oh, they're like whispering their idea. Like they're worried that I'll either steal it or someone will overhear it. But it sounds like you were just gabbing your face off about this possible idea you had, and it led you to being able to be connected to a team working.
I believe that so deeply in my core, and you hear investors say it a lot, but ideas are worthless and people and execution are everything. Like, ideas are free. Like, they are so easy to have, and it doesn't matter if a bunch of people are working on the same thing as you. You have to believe that you can execute in a differentiated way,
100%.
in a better way, and then go do it.
Yeah, is it totally? And I actually thinking about that, and I know this is a few leaps ahead from your capsule days, is when you're building Calibrate. And when you just had that idea, I remember receiving this document from you coming up with like, people were just giving name ideas or like what you should name your company, or here's like this idea that I'm working on, when it was really, like you were saying, just an idea, but here you are circulating it with a bunch of people. And I think that's really unusual because a lot of new entrepreneurs are so worried about sharing their thoughts and their concepts before it's fully baked. And what they don't realize is like, you can't get something fully baked unless you start.
I believe that so much, which is like you have to build things for people that people want, right? Like this is like the faster horses problem, but you have to say like what's the pain point, and not just my pain point, but like what are other people's pain points? Like who are the super users? Who are the early adopters of this going to be? And then how are the next rings of people going to think about it too? How are you going to, like in most of what I've done in my career, e-commerce too, I've done like category creating businesses. And so I think when you do that, you're saying like, there's a humongous chasm to cross where you're going from like people have zero awareness of this thing to people are going to adopt this thing at like you hope, at like an incredible adoption rate. And so GLP-1s and Calibrate's the perfect example of that, where I would meet with people back in 2019.
Yeah, so talk to us about that, how you made that transition from Capsule to founding Calibrate.
So towards the end of Capsule, I had a pretty strong thesis that pharma was the last category of things on planet Earth that hadn't gone direct to consumer. You think about it, pharma companies sell their product to a wholesaler who sells it to the pharmacy, who takes it out of their packaging, puts it in generic packaging with legally mandated size 6 font on it, and sells it to the consumer in like a generic paper bag. So you have no idea who made it, and they have no idea who you are. And that, as we've watched the rest of the world go direct to consumer, is problematic because it means the person selling the product doesn't really know how the people using the product feel about it. And at Capsule, that showed up in really interesting ways. Like we worked on drug launches, and we like launched an eye drop, and the pharma company got feedback from us within a couple of days of the launch that consumers couldn't really open the packaging. But they were like, we wouldn't have gotten this feedback until some agency read about it on Reddit and told us otherwise. Like we just like you could just close the feedback loop really tightly. And so I started to form this thesis that like the world needed direct to consumer pharma in order to take the drugs that were coming that actually treated root cause and make them like actually meaningful for consumers, like actually get consumers to understand how they work, give feedback on them, and then hopefully like take them in the context of their broader health, not just like this is a medication, I take the medication. And for me, I had this really strong opinion about antidepressants. Antidepressants were tested and basically developed as 90-day interventions. And then we started delivering them through primary care doctors and psychiatrists who could prescribe them in once-a-year visits, if not less frequently, and just increase the dose over time. And that's like a total fail. That's like a healthcare delivery system that in no way, shape, or form is allowing you to access the drug the way it was developed, right? And we can't, like if you think about all of the different stakeholders and how people get paid and why they show up, there's no reason for anyone to act any differently. Like that's a totally expected outcome based on the current incentive system. And so I had this strong opinion that like we're developing drugs that treat root cause. We're developing these drugs and testing them as interventions rather than long-term treatments. And then we're not able to deliver them. And more meaningfully, these migraine drugs came to market in 2017, 2018 that had this huge behavior component to them. The more that you tracked your migraines, the more that you did different behaviors around your migraines with the medications, the better they worked in clinical trials. but there was just no way for doctors to deliver that in the real world. And so I started thinking, like, how could you deliver lifestyle change with medication in a way that like ultimately got people off medication? Because I also had this belief that like no one really wants to take a medication. No one wants to feel sick. And I think for me, like I was kind of spinning and stirring on this whole this whole idea when a doctor told my mom about Ozempic. It was 2018. And I was like, if everyone in America knew about Ozempic, everyone in America would want to take Ozempic.
And you were one of the first ones to make it commercial, to make it accessible D2C, right? I mean, I had never heard of Ozempic until you told me about it.
Yeah. The year I started researching the category, 40,000 people were taking the predecessor drug to Wegovy. And today, 1 in 8 Americans is taking a GLP-1.
Unbelievable. That's insane.
That's
And
crazy.
that's 5 years later,
Yeah,
6 years later.
Unbelievable.
It's truly incredible. So you were very much a pioneer of that, of making it more accessible for people that needed it and match it with not only just the medication, but with behavioral changes, lifestyle changes.
I started emailing doctors who published research on GLP-1s, and I just had this like gut feeling like this is what we got wrong with antidepressants. Like we had all of these lifestyle interventions, we had the idea of cognitive behavioral therapy, we had the ideas behind what behavior change people needed to make, but we weren't able to deliver it in the real world. And so we just said, okay, like it's better for people to get the medication than not, and so we'll just release it into the current ecosystem, release it into the current healthcare delivery system rather than not, which is like probably the right choice. And I was like, what if you could figure out who will actually respond? In the early GLP-1 trials, as many as half of people didn't really respond to the medication. It was much lower now.
Wow.
But like, what if you could figure out who was going to respond and who wasn't? And you could get the people who weren't going to respond off the medication. No one wants to get a medication that's not working. And what if you could figure out who those people were going to be before you ever tried the medications? And what if you could figure out how to get people better results, more weight loss, better control of their overall metabolic health? What if you could figure out how to get those people off of medication? So I started emailing the doctors who published the research on GLP-1s and getting on the phone with them. And I was particularly interested in doctors who'd researched GLP-1s in different behaviors. So GLP-1s in food, GLP-1s in sleep, GLP-1s in emotional health, GLP-1s in exercise. And I just started piecing together what ultimately became Calibrate's clinical advisory board of people who really believed. No one believed the whole thing because no one had done it yet, but people believed different silos of it. People believed like GLP-1s really impact sleep, and here's why I think that happens. GLP-1s really impact exercise and your ability to develop muscle, and here's why I think that happens. And like basically put them in a room together, literally. This is before COVID. And said, like, what would it look like to put together a program that thought about all this together? And no surprise, that was like really controversial. And they left as if like, I don't know if this is ever going to work. Like, I don't know if that person's research marries with my research, and I don't know what that will look like. But there was this concept of intensive lifestyle intervention. So the government paid for it for Medicare and Medicaid patients already. And it was basically like, what if you go to a person and you say, I want you to comprehensively make changes to all of these different behaviors, and government pays for it for Medicare and Medicaid patients already. So basically, I took that concept, like, what if we designed our own intensive lifestyle intervention with our own philosophy using the mechanism of action of GLP-1s to basically replicating it with behavior change? And I put together an advisory board of people who thought that would be possible.
I love that. And it actually reminded me of the early days of Ivy with Lee when we were knocking on interior designers' doors in San Francisco trying to get intel, right? We knew nothing of the industry, but we spent weeks and weeks just knocking on doors, bringing coffee and just observing and just in getting all of that information in. So these early steps make a big difference.
Starbucks is the key to 90% of cold meetings.
Yeah, right? I mean, that's how you do it. But I think a lot of people are curious about Ozempic, actually, now that we're talking about it. You said 1 in 8 Americans, which is insane especially when you compare it to, what was it, 40,000 in the early days of you starting Calibrate. So what is Ozempic and who is it for? And how is it different from GLP-1s? Like, we know on this call, but I think everyone is so curious as we see it spread on Instagram, we see it spread on social media, across celebrities, we see everyone trimming down. And just curious your thoughts on, how much is too much? Who is it really for? And anything else you have to say about it for the everyday person.
Okay, well, that's a lot. GLP-1s are a category of medication, and they're called GLP-1s because they stimulate your body's own production of glucagon-like peptide 1. So they're receptor agonists.
Say that fast and backwards. That
Yeah,
like
I
would be
can't.
very
I
fun.
certainly can't say it any faster or backwards.
I mean, I did not even know that GLP-1s was Ozempic. I only knew it as Ozempic.
So the category is GLP-1, and your body has GLP-1. It basically is a signal that gets sent between your gut and your brain a few times a day, generally when you see or smell or taste food for the first time. And it's basically like the thing we know that it does is help regulate satiety. So basically help regulate gastric emptying, how fast your stomach empties and feels full. We also have a hypothesis that it does all sorts of other things for your metabolic system. So to basically zoom back, your metabolic system is the way that your body turns food into energy. And we know that there are all sorts of hormonal components to this, and that all sorts of hormones in your body have different impacts on this. And that's why we know that like when you don't sleep, you're starving the next day. And we know that when you don't sleep, you test positive for prediabetes after a few nights of not sleeping. Like we know that there is like a profound impact between profound connection between your blood sugar and the way that your hormones work and the way that your behaviors impact all that. So your metabolic system is broadly the way that those different pieces work together and the way that your cells actually consume energy. And just to zoom back again, Americans are not metabolically healthy. So the way that we measure metabolic health varies a little bit by different industry groups, but the basic idea is that if your blood sugar, if your blood pressure, if your waist circumference, if your cholesterol are in healthy ranges, unregulated by medication, and 92% of Americans don't meet that definition. Okay, so are they for everyone? That's a really good question. But
Yeah.
like, do we have a problem that impacts pretty much everyone? Yes, we do. And we can, like, it would be an entire podcast to talk about how we got here, so we won't go into that. But like, this is genetic, this is hormonal, but it's also extraordinarily environmental. We've created what's called an obesogenic society where like we don't walk anywhere, we don't move, and then we like eat tons of ultra processed food that our bodies don't really know what to do with. So if you think about Ozempic, it's basically this category of drugs has been around. The first one was approved by the FDA in 2005, and they were initially developed to treat type 2 diabetes. So to basically help your body stabilize its blood sugar. As a quote side effect, we were noticing that people were losing weight. And that I use like the quote side effect because to me, if you think about everything as a spectrum, you have people gaining weight, you have people being overweight or having obesity, and then you have prediabetes and diabetes. And that to me is all one spectrum. That's like a controversial statement more broadly. But the basic idea is that we were noticing people were losing weight. And so we started to do research on how the drugs could treat obesity in people without diabetes or without insulin resistance, which is what causes diabetes or how you diagnose diabetes. So the medications were initially rolled out and used to treat type 2 diabetes. Starting in 2014, we approved one to treat obesity for the first time. It wasn't that effective. And so you just didn't hear that much about it. People lost maybe like 5 or 6% of their body weight. So if they weigh 200 pounds, they were losing 10 pounds. But then all of a sudden, we started testing different doses and different bioavailabilities and different mechanisms for delivery. And we were able to get people to lose 10% of their body weight and 12% of their body weight. And now we have drugs that help people lose 25% of their body weight in development. And so all of a sudden you just saw this like insane pull, which is basically what I bet on with Calibrate, where for the first time ever, maybe absent the vaccines during COVID, you had consumers saying, I want that. You've never really had that before. Pharma used to have to go make markets and create demand and go tell doctors and teach doctors and create a standard of care and get insurance companies to reimburse. And here you just have consumers saying, I want that. I care about that and I want that.
That's really incredible. And so Calibrate was one of the first ones to take this to market, make it more broadly available. And was there any kind of vetting process in people accessing the drugs? How is that being monitored right now?
For sure. At Calibrate, we always took the approach of a conservative, results first value system led by doctors. So our doctors always wrote the criteria for who got access to the medication, and it used a tighter criteria than what had been tested in clinical trials and what the FDA had approved. Over time, I think you will see the FDA approve and people test much broader indications. So people who need to lose less weight or want to lose less weight, people who have different biomarkers in terms of their metabolic markers, in terms of what's causing them to be to want to take the medication. But we took a really, really narrow approach initially. The strategy for the business was basically, if you can prove that the product works, you have a market, right? If you can prove that your intensive lifestyle intervention delivers better weight loss than a drug alone, and that those results last longer than the drug alone, people will pay for that. Whether that's consumers paying for it, or their employer paying for it, or the government paying for it, that was the whole strategy for the business. And so we wanted to basically we wanted to start the business with a group of people who were high intent, who wanted it to work for them, and who would have great results, because that was what fueled the future success and access for the business.
And I think, as many people listening to this know, right, this industry has skyrocketed. You started a business that then you were able to raise like $200 million in, I think, like 2 years. Like, it was insane. You grew your company to an insane number. And I'm just curious, what has that experience taught you as an entrepreneur? Like, what do you walk away from going from, an idea to then, in less than 2 years, raising $200 million for that idea?
It was more like 5 years, but the first $100 million came very quickly.
Okay, the first $100 million in like a year, I actually think. We're gonna what's insane, Isabelle,
Right.
like, who raises $100 million in a year?
In
So
a
I
year.
want to know.
Yeah.
It's
So
ridiculous.
in a lot of I've spent a lot of time reflecting, and in a lot of ways, that was a function of luck and the market, right? In a lot of ways, we were at a zero interest rate market, and we were at an insane inflection point in digital health and consumer health because of COVID. And we had reached a total tipping point in terms of consumer demand for this specific category. I launched the business in June of 2020. So right after investors started getting comfortable investing after COVID again, and right when they wanted to dump money into digital health.
But did you get so arrogant? Like, honest, I really real talk now.
Did I get arrogant?
When you rolled $100 million in 1 year, you must have thought you were the SHIT. Like, were you actively trying to be
It must have felt
humble?
great.
Yeah, come on, Isabelle. How did you keep your feet on the ground? And what was that process like?
I will explain, but I actually don't feel like I got arrogant at that point at all. I feel like I got almost desperate. When you put that much pressure on any person
Oh my
and
gosh.
any small team, and I'll go through some of the pieces of the business and the raise and stuff, but when you put that much pressure on something that's so young and immature, it just it's like a total pressure cooker, right? And so in a lot of ways, I felt awful every day. I felt like I was having a fire hose sprayed in my face every morning. I felt like I wasn't the right person. I felt like I had no idea what I was doing. And I'm not a person who had regularly experienced imposter syndrome in her career before. I kind of always thought I deserved more responsibility and I was doing a good job. And it was a real turning point in terms of my self-awareness. And that kind of growth is hard and feels awful. It was really painful.
Do you think it was too soon? Was it too quick?
Oh, yeah. If I could go back and do it over again, it's hard to say because there's so many external forces. And I think to just list off some takeaways, one of my biggest takeaways, and I used to say this to the team a lot in the later years of the business, is it's really hard to build a business around things that you don't control. So we didn't control insurance coverage for the drugs.
Totally.
We didn't control the inventory for the drugs. Those ended up being two massive Achilles heels if you just had one of those problems, and we had both.
God. Yeah.
That was really hard. And you also don't control the venture markets, right? All of a sudden we went from this is amazing, go raise another couple $100 million to there's actually never going to be another venture dollar available for this business. So do you mind to completely invert the way you operate? It's really hard to build a functioning company in when there's that much pressure on any specific, and it wasn't me or the business specifically, to Lee's question. It was the category. People were so excited about the category. We were getting cold emails from the best investors on the planet being we just want to invest in this category. And you're the only, when Wegovy got approved, we were the only game. We were the only people who'd raised like real money. We were the only people. If you wanted to bet on Wegovy, and if you wanted to bet on the category, and you were a venture investor in the summer of 2021, you called me. And so I honestly never took it personally, because it wasn't. Like, it was about the category and people's excitement. I didn't get to know people well enough. So my big takeaways are like, it's as glamorous as it looks, it is like the ultimate pressure cooker. And I think self-awareness is a journey, not a destination. Something that like I kind of nominally believed before Calibrate. But I was like, I'm getting pretty self-aware by the time I started Calibrate. I was like, I have no idea the depths of my capacity. Like, I literally, there's times that I showed up that I am beyond surprised I was able to show up. And there's times where I couldn't pull it together and couldn't pull something off that I'm like still kind of surprised about.
How do you do it without a co-founder? No, honestly, while you're talking about the weight of this stress,
This is why I'm obsessed with your relationship. I had never operated in a business with co-founders. I had worked at 3 startups before Calibrate, and they all had single founders.
I can't imagine it.
I just said, like, I don't want to learn the dynamics of co-founders while starting a business. Like, that sounds so hard. It didn't mean I didn't have early employees who were fundamental to the success of the business. Like, my first hire was our chief medical officer. It's her program. It's her baby. It came out of her brain.
But it's different. An employee is different than a co-founder, like someone that you can, like Alec, I can be so vulnerable. So would you have a co-founder or no? Or are you just so worried about the dynamics? You're also a very big personality.
And you're also very good at what you do. You can do a lot of different.
Yeah, you don't need a co-founder.
The thing that's amazing about your partnership is that how long you have known each other. Like, to me, starting a company with someone's a marriage. And so it just like, how well do you feel like you know that person? And is it like you've spent 80 hours together brainstorming in a WeWork? Like, to me, that's not enough. Like, you guys were really good friends.
I think we were lucky. We weren't that good friends, actually. We met twice in our lives. And like, that's all it was.
Yeah, we weren't that good friends. We became friends. Yeah.
Okay, but along the way, you've become like,
We became like sisters. Yeah.
The journey made us sisters. But I guess, I don't know, the idea of having to do this solo, I just can't. I can't imagine it, Isabelle. You must have woken up sick every day.
It's even more admirable. I mean, it makes it so much more insane what you did. But talk to us a little bit about this pressure from investors.
it didn't really come from investors so much as it came from myself.
But don't you think I feel like there is something about the tech industry specifically about growth at all costs and raising as much money as possible and growing as fast as possible, all the while losing money for the most part. There are very few startups that are profitable with these huge rounds of capital raised. How do you see that? Do you see that differently for whatever you're working on next, which I'd love to talk about if we can? But how do you view that?
To me, the pressure was a result of the market that we chose to operate in, right? We could have built this business as a clinic. We could have built this bit like that made money, that cash flowed by billing insurance, right? But we had this ambition to change the way the world treats weight, to basically reach and touch as many people as possible. And I think in hindsight, the way that I tried to do that, like venture-backed healthcare services is how it's called within my niche, was kind of crazy. Like, I'm not sure that I would bet on venture-backed healthcare services as a category, because I'm just not sure you can have 100x returns. I don't really know how you have a 100x return when you're actually delivering care one-to-one. And there was no real way to get that business to delivering care one-to-many. And when I think about what I'm working on now, which we can come back to in a second, like, it's really like, how do you scale? Like, how do you really create meaningful access to people? It's a one-to-many, right? And so I think that like the pressure always came from me and what I wanted to do next in the business and where I wanted to take the business and how I wanted to get there. And then we made, like, there's one-way decisions and there's two-way decisions. And when we raised that much capital and ran at it that hard and that fast and decided to acquire customers and take advantage of first mover, like, there's a huge cost to being first mover. You're creating the category, you're educating consumers, you're educating providers, you're educating the entire market on how to think about what you're doing. Like, the amount of time that I had to spend in the employer sales channel, I had a slide that said a tidal wave of GLP-1 utilization is coming. And then I had a slide that said a tidal wave of GLP-1 utilization has come. And now it would be like, hello.
Yeah.
They don't want to talk about anything else. But
Yeah.
it was in the beginning, it was like, have you heard of these drugs? They're safe. They're effective. Here's a doctor. Here's another doctor. Here's 3 doctors to talk to you about how safe and effective they are. And then by the end, it was like, here's the nitty gritty of our business, which kind of happens naturally as you grow a business anyway. But when you're creating a market, there's so much lift that goes to not even the core thing that you're trying to do, but there's so many resources that go to just educating the people around you about what the business is.
So now tell us what you're doing next. What are you cooking?
I'm excited. One of my core insights from Calibrate is like, I love spending time one-to-one with patients. And I love talking to people about what's working, what's not working, and like what they want. It is so vulnerable. And I think it takes me back to when I broke my back to feel like the healthcare system's not working for you, to feel like you are not getting something that you know that your body needs and that will make you healthy and happy and make you feel good. And so for me, that showed up. I would call patients all the time at Calibrate. I easily spoke to the first 1,000 customers all one-to-one. They all have my phone number. They all still have my phone number. And it's just like how I operate is just like understanding the anecdotes, understanding like I remember going on a weekend with Lee once. This was a long time ago. Remember Lee went to Miami and Lee had like all these dashboards and she spent the entire weekend like in the dashboard of her business. Like, I don't mind a dashboard. Like, I like to know what's going on in my business, but like, I like an anecdote so much more than I like a dashboard. Like, if I'm going to spend the weekend with my business, like, I'm in the customer support emails, like reading the emails, like I'm in the Facebook groups, like reading the comments, like I'm in the Reddit group, reading the comments. And so that is just like what I love. Like, I love communities. I love this idea that the real way to unlock metabolic health for everyone is to help everyone get access to the types of information that we were giving at Calibrate. To basically say, there's a huge information vacuum here. All of a sudden, 1 in 8 Americans are taking drugs that they still didn't know are GLP-1s. Like, all of a sudden, like 1 in 8 Americans have no idea what the best science says about how they should change their behaviors while they're taking those medications. And so what happens when it's 1 in 4? What happens if it's 1 in 2? Like, how do we take this moment and get as much like real information to people as possible? And so I'm basically building a community platform that lets people get access to the best science and business information about the category, and then meet and talk to other people taking the medications, and just have a place like we've built in cancer, like we've built in like patients like me type communities, to just talk to other people taking GLP-1s and just be able to say like, how does it make you feel? And how are you thinking about this? There's a new headline about GLP-1s every 30 minutes. And so like, how does that headline make you feel? How are you thinking about that cultural moment? Also, what does the real science say? And so I'm excited to build it. I'm excited to launch it.
I love it. And, I love communities. I think communities are so powerful. So I think that's amazing. And I love that it doesn't matter where you get this medicine. As long as you're on this medicine, you can be a part of this community and learn from each other.
I remember we shared an investor, and when I was taking money from him, he'd already given you guys money. He'd actually bought your company, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, why did you, I don't know. I was telling him how much I loved you guys. And he was like, every trade show I went to, they were just popping up. And they were popping up with like tote bags, and they knew everyone, and they'd like ingratiated themselves in the community. And they had built this community that we'd never been able to build. And I just knew we had to buy their company.
It's always been at the center of everything we built.
Yeah, truly. And I so believe in communities. I believe that a product that is built within a community, it's the best type of product, right? Because people aren't just users of your products. It becomes a part of their identity.
Yeah.
But I know we do have to wrap up. This was so much fun. I think the most important thing that I've yet to say, that I need to say, is that, my life mission is to find you an amazing partner. So if you are listening to this podcast right now and you have a brother, you have a brother-in-law, you have a good friend who's an amazing man, and you want to be matched with an incredible woman, well, just reach out to us and we'll set up your person with Isabelle. Because
and what I'll say about Lee is that she's a great matchmaker. She's already got 1 wedding under her belt. So Never misses an opportunity.
Exactly. So if you have an amazing male in your network, let's set them up with Isabelle. There you go. If you've listened this
True
far,
friendship.
True friendship.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. I'm so
Thanks
excited
for being with us, Isabelle.
with us and
Loved having
sharing.
you.